Hello, my friends. Welcome to today's show. I hope your day is going well wherever it is. I hope that it is treating you right.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
I want to take a moment and we're going to jump back in time to a different episode and we're going to talk about it. A few weeks ago, I talked about how I don't think healthy people vilify those they disagree with. And a lot of people reached out. Some people really liked it. Some people really didn't. They felt that I was skirting past moral issues was typically how they put it. One person asked me, and yes, she'll know who she is, well, what are you advocating for? Which was a question I actually laughed at because I think anybody who knows me knows what I advocate for and what I don't advocate for, or how do I advocate, I think is what she asked me. And I think anybody who knows me knows that I advocate for certain things and other things I don't, because I don't necessarily think that we need to advocate for them. But one of the questions that came up from this was somebody asked me, well, help me understand, why do you think this is dangerous? And I think that's a fair question that needs answered, so I want to talk about it. Because here's the thing, I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand up to moral issues. I'm not saying that we shouldn't even express our moral concerns. But I am saying that there is a danger and anger that we miss. And here's something that I've been chewing on a lot lately. As we get more and more away from identity and who we are based on what we are, we look for things. And the danger with anger is it allows me to have a fake identity fast. Because the minute I can vilify you, I have a bad guy, and then I can be the hero, I can be the good guy, and then I can go ahead and move forward with my anger, and I don't have to think it through. I don't have to use logic. I don't have to stop and wonder, well, maybe the other person thinks that they're moral. In fact, the immigration issue, which is one of the ones that I see the most vilification over, is one of those issues where, quite frankly, both sides argue that they have the moral high ground. And essentially their response to the other side, the people who say that they're wrong, is, nuh-uh. Well, that's not actually an argument. And that's not actually something that causes us to want to grow and change and be better. That's not actually something that moves us forward. I don't see either side stopping and asking themselves, well, what about the other side? What is the moral viewpoint that they have, and how did they come to it? It's just, no, they're wrong and I'm right. And that's not something that healthy people do, whatever the issue. I have friends who hate religion, and religion is very important in my life. My faith is very important in my life. I can vilify them or I can seek to understand them. And that, by definition, is a moral issue. I have friends who believe things different than I do on moral issues. I am anti-death penalty. I have friends that believe that is an immoral position. And if I vilify them as, oh, they're just bloodthirsty, hungry, blah, 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 I have lost out in an opportunity to have real substantive conversation with them. And I have lost in an opportunity to be healthier. And so let's talk about the science behind this for a minute. There is a reality that when we're angry, we don't have to think through a whole lot of details. Anger can just spur us to some sort of action. And that action can often be destructive. That's why we'll often hear people say that anger is destructive. And if you know me, you know I will try to gently push back on that and say, no. Anger just is. What we do with it can be destructive. It can also be constructive. But as we lean into that, also anger can give us an identity that we don't really earn. It's just we become part of the group. Group identity. You've heard of group think. Well, group identity can happen when suddenly now we're angry and we're pushing forward into that anger. And then what happens is as we push forward into that anger, distress comes for us because it helps us feel good, but we don't have to actually solve anything. This is one of the reasons, if you study humans, you'll find that often they will find reasons to become angry. Kids will do this. It's where it's probably the most easily seen, but it's true in adults too. We will look for reasons to become angry because the other emotions that we have to deal with are uncomfortable. Or the cognitive dissonance of maybe two competing emotions. or empathy for two different parties or two different ways, right? And again, the issue around immigration, a lot of the issues that we're currently talking about in politics, both sides claim to have the moral high ground, and they claim that their moral high ground is right because of their anger. And that is not sustainable. If anger is the reason that we get to say we're right, we're probably on a path that isn't actually very sustainable for a long and healthy life. This will become especially challenging for a society that moves more and more away from some sort of fixed identity. In other words, I have an identity as in I'm a Martino. That is my last name. This is what we do. I am a counselor. I am a friend. I am a husband. As those moorings become less and less secure, anger becomes something that we can relate to because it is a quick, not fix, but it is a quick return. It gives us a quick benefit. It gives us a short-term benefit, but man, it feels so good to be able to say, that person over there, they're immoral because they disagree with me. I have the moral high ground, and anybody who believes what they believe is horrible. And you see this not just on the political issues. Bring up something like the carnivore diet or the vegan diet. It's funny to me because I was talking to a friend of mine who's carnivore. I was like, why'd you do carnivore? He's like, well, I can't argue with the results. I lost X amount of pounds, I think 28 pounds. Which is the same argument that the vegan diet people make. Now, it turns out, as we talked about it more, there are other reasons he wanted to do it. He wanted to reset his mind about food, et cetera, et cetera. But it's easy to vilify people, right? People, and you'll see this because we make up names for them. We don't really have substantive conversations. What we have is name-calling conversations, where we can call somebody we disagree with, who disagrees with us, a name. That is not how healthy people interact, and that is not how emotionally mature people interact. I've not started publishing on my Emotionally Inclined blog yet this year, but I do have a couple of posts in the queue, and I want to get out ahead of it, if you will. I want to get a few more posts done so that I have a little bit of wiggle room so that I don't get you reading and then I stop. But one of the posts that I have almost done is outrage doesn't make us right. And that's really what I want to camp out on today. We tend to think that outrage makes us right. And as long as we're angry, that's what wins. As long as we can be disgusted, we win. And that is probably, in fact, there's no probably about it. That is a method that will almost always get us in trouble because it is not something that emotionally mature and healthy people do. Being outraged doesn't make you right. So if you're one of the people that runs to, if you're not outraged, you're part of the problem, you need to learn better arguing skills. That's just reality. And I want to point out, I'm talking about what you're doing, not who you are. Anecdotally, I think part of the problem is I'm running into more and more people who are feeling disempowered. They're feeling less empowered. And I've talked about this before. We are confusing being angry with being empowered. And let's be honest. Look, I love social media. I've talked about this before. But social media platforms, they thrive on emotional engagement, not logical engagement. They amplify voices that express indignation, anger, and moral superiority, right? Like, if you are angry, the more angry you are, the more engagement you tend to get. And outrage can shine like a spotlight on injustice, and it can catalyze action, which is one of the hard things that we have to wrestle out. Like, there is an anger that will bubble up inside of us that can help us. But outrage alone doesn't make the argument valid, a position justified, or a belief accurate. And that's what we have to explore. Part of the appeal is that when we're outraged, we believe we have identified a clear line between right and wrong, and we know that we have certainly found the line between good and evil. And this clarity can feel empowering. In a world where we are increasingly feeling disempowered, we can suddenly feel like we have empowered ourselves. And that helps us because one of the things that's happening in our world is we're being preached to that morals are ambiguous. Well, when morals are ambiguous, then what happens? We are disempowered because we're not sure how to move forward. Morals help us move forward. And one of the reasons that outrage is so appealing is that it validates our sense of self. Expressing indignation allows us as individuals to align ourselves with a cause, signaling to others and to ourselves that we may be more morally aware and engaged than other people. Outrage can help us forge connections with like-minded individuals, creating a sense of community and a shared purpose. This gives us that false identity because we don't know how we actually feel about the people that we're aligned with. We just know we're both angry at the same thing. this is particularly evident in the digital age where social media provides such a platform. And you can see it online. Even in my town, there's a group that talks about putting kids first, and they have one set of views, and they go at it, and they vilify the people in another group who talk about chattering in our community, who really dislike that group. And it's back and forth, and they attack each other. And the only thing I'm sure of is that everybody's angry and they all disagree with each other. When we can do that, when we can engage in meaningful conversation, we might still be angry. We might still have outrage. We might still think the other person's wrong. In fact, quite frankly, a lot of times that's going to happen. Because we do want to recognize that there is anger when we see injustice. There should probably be anger when we see injustice. But we have to accept the fact that with a lot of political issues, that can be a complex statement. That can be a complex thing to try to navigate. And what happens is people pull out parts of religion and they throw this up like, well, what about this? And what about that? What about this right? What about that right? But if no one ever got mad at slavery, we wouldn't have ended it. But then you can't turn around and be like, well, but let's talk about abortion, right? Both sides of that, they get angry when you start talking about, when the other side starts talking about what they believe. The pro-abortionists, they get really mad at the anti-abortionists. And the anti-abortionists tend to get really mad at the pro-abortionists. What happens? In fact, it's so weird. Nobody wants to be anti on that side, on that conversation. Because then we vilify the people that we're trying to have the conversation with. And here's the thing, we run out of people to make into villains. If you don't believe me on this, read Douglas Murray's book, The Madness of Crowds, Because he talks about how that once we get to third and fourth generations of things, or third and fourth waves of things, they tend to eat the first and second waves and say that they're really not whatever it is. Because what happens is when we're angry, we're not all that given to critical thinking, and we're certainly not given to humility. In fact, humility is really not all that valued in our society today. Recognition that our knowledge and understanding is limited involves humility, and very few people are willing to do that. Critical thinking has to admit that. It says we got to analyze arguments, and one of the things that we're doing is we're getting away from objective truth, right? One of the things that always kind of confuses me as a relationship therapist is when people talk about, well, you can just have sex with whoever you want. But then they get mad if somebody they're dating has sex with whoever they want. Well, they can have sex with whoever they want except for when they're dating me. Why? That seems illogical to me. They're just living their best life. And critical thinking has to be involved in that conversation. Part of it is we've gotten to the place where anybody who disagrees with me is a hater. If I say that the color blue is the best color there is because I love the color blue, and you say, no, green's the best color, well, why are you hating on me? And that response is born in a lack of humility. If the only people that disagree with me, if they're the only haters, that's a lack of humility on my part. That is pride, and I have the right position. And what happens is we lose the opportunity for a better discourse there, for an engaged conversation, because we have failed to balance passion and perspective. We have failed to balance outrage and curiosity. And that's what we need to do if we're going to have healthy conversations. We need to recognize, you know what, I really passionately believe this, and I don't understand how you can, but I'm willing to listen to you. And I'm willing to recognize that you are not the totality of one belief. And we can do politics on this one. The people who support Trump, that isn't their whole identity, even if they act like it is. We need to understand that it isn't. The people who support whoever's going to, Kamala ran against Trump and he can't run again. Whoever doesn't like Trump, that isn't their whole identity. I talk about this all the time. The Disneyfication of our world has said that people we disagree with, they're all bad. And the people we agree with, they're all good. Good guys are all good and bad guys are all bad. That isn't real life most of the time. Most of the time, it's much more complicated than that. So how do we move forward? A lot of people said, okay, well, what do we do? I would tell you, try not to call names. Work really hard to leave names out of the discourse that you're engaging in. Leave attacks about who the person is out of the conversation. Talk about their belief and why you think it's wrong. State why you think it's wrong. State why you think your opinion is right. Use critical thinking. Use logical arguments. But talk about the behaviors. You can still be angry and do this. That's one of the things that I don't really understand. We tend to think that if we're angry, then that's all we can talk about. or we can only do certain things because, well, I was angry. But that isn't how it works. In other words, you can be angry and still foster a respectful discourse. You can tell somebody what you think they're doing is wrong and still be respectful in how you say it. Now, look, they might say that just disagreeing with them is disrespectful, but that's just not real. They're entitled to that opinion, I suppose, but there's just no way. And you could even say to them, I've done this sometimes, okay, well, what I'm trying to do is express an opinion counter to you. How could I do that so you wouldn't feel it was disrespectful? And if they don't have a way that you could say that, that's on them, not you. You have to have some level of objective respectfulness. Can you cultivate that critical thinking, practice intellectual humility, and foster respectful discourse with individuals that you disagree with? I believe you can. I believe that I can. I believe that you and I can have, in fact, I believe that you and I can have disagreement and we can have a passionate conversation and still be respectful of each other. I love debate. I love discourse. I love having conversations where we disagree because that's how I learn. It also helps me build my emotional intelligence, and it will help you too. So I hope this helps. A lot of people wrote in asking me questions like, hey, what about this? What about that? I hope that this gives a little bit more clarity to it. What about you? How have you found yourself engaging conversations with people that you disagree with? Let me know. Write it in the comments on my website. Send me a message, joe@joemartino.com. You can find me on different social medias. IamJoeMartino.com is my website. Don't forget to share this with a friend. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.